Hi everybody, welcome to a new episode on my channel, The Dissenter. My guest today is Dr. Randy Thornhill. He is an American entomologist and evolutionary biologist. He is also a professor of biology at the University of New Mexico and was the president of the Human Behavior and Evolution Society from 2011 to 2013. He is the author of several books, including A Natural History of Rape and the Parasite-Stress Theory of Values and Sociality. So, Dr. Thornhill, thank you a lot for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me, Ricardo.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Okay, so today we're going to focus the conversation on your book, A Natural History of Rape. So, the first question I would like to ask you is, in what ways is knowledge about the evolutionary basis of sex differences important for us to better study and understand the phenomenon of rape?
The science of sex differences is very fundamental to that because it is men's psychological and behavioral design that causes rape, and so you have to understand sex differences, men's pursuit of casual sex, men's pursuit of partners without commitment, and you have to understand the female side, female choice, and so forth, female mate choice, before you can really talk seriously about rape. So that involves total immersion in the evolutionary biology of our species and the evolutionary biology of sexual psychology and sex differences. So that is a fundamental basis for serious discussion of rape.
Mhm. Okay, and could you please talk a little bit about what are the main sex differences that are important to know for this discussion about rape? So, for example, as far as I understood it in your book, you say that for men who didn't really have access to sexual partners, that from an evolutionary perspective, it would be a good strategy for them to rape women.
Right, right. So, so yeah, the a fundamental sex difference and design of men's sexuality is the pursuit of partners without commitment, so high partner number, and that is a result of evolution by sexual selection in our history, and so men are designed to see sexual opportunities and sexual interest in females even when it's not there, and that was adapted historically, of course, for men to do that because it increased mating success and hence resulted in such men being favored by sexual selection, and so that is the evolutionary background of that. And not just rape, but sexual coercion in general. There are various kinds of sexual coercion, rape being one type, but there's intimidation and so forth, and harassment by males. Those are other forms of sexual coercion. But it's, what we've done is provided a general perspective on how important it is to understand the evolution of men's sexuality to really get a handle on rape, the causes of rape, and hence be in a position to do something about rape.
Mhm. And so, does it begin with the fact that, I mean, these sex differences and the different sexual strategies that are optimized for each sex, does it start with the fact that men and women have different physiologies in terms of sex? Because what I mean by this is that men and women produce gametes at different rates, and so men are virtually all the time available to impregnate another female, but women are not really, right?
Yes, yes. Yes, that's very fundamental to the understanding of human sex differences and sex differences in general. In the beginning in the 1970s, it was very late that we being biologists, really understood for the first time the evolution of sex differences. And most of the creative thinking in that regard was done by my buddy Bob Trivers. He provided the first theory for the evolution of sex differences. And it has to do with fundamentally, you start with the fact that females invest more, and they have to invest more to successfully reproduce. And that begins with the big egg, big gamete, and includes investment by the female in our species, in pregnancy and lactation and so forth. Tremendous investment, obligate investment in order for a female to successfully reproduce. And if you look at males, however, the minimum investment for successful reproduction by a male is trivial. So a cheap ejaculate and a few minutes of distraction from other things that are needed to promote male reproductive success. So that disparity, that asymmetry in the minimum investment necessary for successful reproduction has been profoundly important in the evolutionary history of our species in shaping how selection, sexual selection, has acted differently on the sexes and created a male sexual psychology that is very actively in pursuit of high mate number, because it doesn't cost much to successfully reproduce with lots and lots of females. And females, on the other hand, have evolved to be the discriminating sex, very, very choosy about who they mate with and which male sires their offspring. And females, of course, have very sophisticated choice adaptations for getting partners that are suitable, both in terms of providing resources for the female and her offspring, as well as genetic quality of the father. So you get this, female choice on the female side, male pursuit of high mate number on the other, and that often leads to lots and lots of between-sex conflict in the context of mating decisions and mating pursuits, and sexual coercion certainly comes out of that oftentimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so according to this evolutionary rationale, is it true that rape is especially painful for women because when they are raped, they are essentially denied the opportunity to choose the partner they are to mate with, and also because after rape, they endure the risk of getting pregnant?
Yes, yes, indeed. So what sexual coercion, rape, intimidation, harassment, whatever kind of sexual coercion it is, does very fundamentally is circumvent female mate and sire choice. And mate choice by females, sire choice by females, choosing the actual genetic father is what I mean by sire choice, has always been adaptive for females. So that's a fundamental motivational pursuit of femininity, to get a good mate, a male, high genetic quality, a providing male, and sexual coercion circumvents that and hence reduces female fitness. And that's why there is so much concern about sexual coercion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that happens, and females or women in this case are very prone to suffer from an episode of rape because they are also not able to choose a good mate, and most of the time men who rape won't even invest in the offspring, right?
That's right. That's right. So, if the male sexually coerces a female, gets sexual access by coercion, then there's no male investment, and that is very important female reproductive success, getting male investment in her and her offspring. So very, very negative fitness consequences, as we say, from rape on the part of females, and hence females don't want to be raped. They have lots of mechanisms to reduce the probability of rape and to deal with it when it has occurred, and that shows the importance of sexual coercion in human evolutionary history. It documents that females are adapted to deal with the problem of rape.
Okay, and in cases where the woman that that is a victim of rape as a partner after she is raped, there's a certain risk that her partner might refuse to continue the relationship due to the fact that men suffer from parental uncertainty, right?
Oh yes, indeed. So that's a consequence too that can follow from the sexual coercion is circumventing female mate choice, and that's maladaptive for the female. Also, if she's pair bonded to a male, she has a male investor in her life, romantic partner, husband, whatever the case may be, then he can if he detects that she's been raped, then he can worry about his paternity and hence withdraw investment. So that's a consequence too that can negatively affect female reproductive success.
Yes, and another thing that really adds to the evolutionary explanation for rape is the fact that men or rapists or rapists that are men tend to pick up on women that are young in the fertile age and that have characteristics that are considered to be attractive by most men, right?
Yes, yeah. The general pattern is in rape in humans is that men do sexually coerce females of high reproductive value, high reproductive capacity, high current fertility, and that's because those females ancestrally were the most reproductive, and sexual selection favored males that were attracted to those females in coercive as well as non-coercive sexual situations. With regard to the application of evolutionary biology to sexual coercion, one fundamental thing to think about is so how do we think about the evolutionary history of sexual coercion by men? And what we have emphasized is that there are really just two hypotheses, ultimate hypotheses, that is, evolutionary hypotheses for men's sexual coercion of females. And those are as follows. One possibility, one hypothesis, evolutionary hypothesis, is that men's rape is the result of rape adaptation itself, or sexual coercion adaptation itself. And so men have some feature in their bods that is functionally designed to sexually coerce females. And that's one possibility. And we've emphasized that in some animals, you find rape adaptation that is very conspicuous on the body and so forth. For example, one system I studied in a group of insects called scorpion flies, where the males have a clamp on the dorsum of the back of the male that holds the female's wing during forced copulation, and the functioning of that clamp is necessary for successful reproduction by males. I showed experimentally. You can do experiments where you render with some material non-functional that clamp, so it doesn't work. Males can't rape. So the clamp functions in the context of forced copulation by males in that species. And men don't have a clamp. So we've emphasized that the likely machinery, if indeed the hypothesis that rape is the result of direct selection and a rape adaptation, the adaptation is going to be in men's heads rather than on men's backs. It's going to be psychological adaptation. So that's one possibility. And then the other possibility, and this exhausts, the second one exhausts all possibilities. So there are two ultimate hypotheses for why men rape. One is this, men have a rape adaptation. The other is that rape is a result of, as a byproduct of adaptations for other purposes. And these adaptations for other purposes are something we've kind of danced around, like you have men's pursuit of high mate number without commitment. That, of course, is going to lead to some sexual coercion because men are pursuing high mate number without commitment. They're seeing sexual interest in females that is not there. That's going to lead to sexual coercion. So, and then you have that machinery in males that evolved by sexual selection that, coupled with female mate choice, is going to, of course, lead to lots of sexual coercion. And so if you look analytically at men's sexual coercion, then you're really dealing with two kinds of possibilities. There are some other hypotheses that have been put forth for why men rape, and we have looked at all those very, very carefully and rejected them logically and empirically. For example, the idea that men rape because there are few psychopaths out there, and psychopaths are well known to engage in lots of sexual coercion. But psychopaths are at a frequency of 1 or 2% in human populations, and that's not going to explain all the rape. Rape's very common, date rape and so forth. You've got lots and lots of rape, and it's not done by 2% of men. And so the psychopath hypothesis is easily rejected empirically. Another hypothesis is that rape by men is a result of pollution in the environment. It gets into during men's brain development, like lead levels in the environment screw up men's sexual development machinery in their heads, and that gives rise to rape. However, you find rape in very clean environments too. For example, tropical, pre-industrial kind of populations, ethnographic kind of populations that anthropologists study. Rape's very, very common, especially in warfare in those societies. And those people live in clean, relatively clean environments. So there are a bunch of other hypotheses that scholars have suggested that could explain the existence of rape in men. However, when you look at it analytically and carefully, as we have done in great detail, you end up with two ultimate hypotheses. Rape by men is either the result of rape adaptation itself, and that's got to be in men's heads, okay, psychological adaptation for rape, or rape is a result of, is a byproduct of adaptation for other purposes, men's pursuit of high mate number coupled with female mate choice. And we have discussed how to test these two hypotheses, but that has moved very, very slowly for obvious reasons. It's not socially adaptive to think seriously about rape, think scientifically about rape sometime. And so a researcher is going to have to be very brave to take on a detailed scientific investigation of sexual coercion by men in terms of these two hypotheses. You can imagine trying to get a grant from the National Institute of Health to study these hypotheses. Those people up there would think that the person was crazy. I mean, that's kind of where we are, and that's going back to the fundamental flaw in Western education, which is that people aren't trained. People generally are not trained in basic evolutionary biology. You got to understand basic evolutionary biology before you can think seriously about anything that humans do, rape or otherwise.
Mhm. Yeah, yes, and it's interesting because at a certain point there you refer to the fact that rape also occurs in other species, so it is a sort of interspecies phenomenon. So
Oh, yeah.
that also adds to the fact that rape is not really, as some people say, a cultural construct or something that is only socially learned or socially acquired, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We've there the use of sexual coercion by males is very, very widespread across species. I mentioned the insect research I did, but much of the coercion research has some been done in birds, but most of the detail work has been done in non-human primates. So chimps and other non-human primates where sexual coercion is very common. Chimp males do have the same diversity of sexual coercion as people do. So males rape sometimes, they harass females and get sexual coercion that way, just harass the female until it's so costly to the female that she has to give the guy sex. That occurs in people, it occurs in chimps, and then intimidation too. The third kind of sexual coercion is also going on in chimps and in humans and some other non-human primates. Yeah. So yeah, the cross species research is very plentiful in this on that topic. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, so we already talked a little bit here about the fact that if the women that are victims of rape have a partner due to parental uncertainty, it raises the probability that that specific man will want to end the relationship. But another point about that I found really interesting is that if the woman shows signs of physical violence and resistance, then the probability that her partner will leave her will reduce, correct?
That's right. That's right. There is some evidence in that regard. We did a study in the way back now of about 800 victims of sexual assault, and these are female victims of sexual assault. The victims ranged in age from children all the way up to older women, post-reproductive age women, which are very uncommon in data sets of rape, both the children and the post-reproductive age. And the researchers that collected these data were very interested in getting a decent sample of children, of girls, and of post-reproductive age females in the sample because they're relatively rare. So they extended the study to include as many of those as possible. So it's an interesting data set the Peters Institute put together in the 70s, 1970s. And so what these victims of rape, sexual assault did was they were interviewed by social workers about their difficulties in dealing with their lives after the sexual assault. And the children, they had caretakers that helped them in the interview and so forth. So what we show is that, as predicted, young women, okay, as opposed to older women and girls. By girls, I mean specifically in the biological context, a pre-reproductive age female human is a girl by my definition. So girls and older women had less psychological trauma following sexual assault compared to reproductive age females, as we predicted, because, as we discussed, rape circumvents female choice and about who the sire is of your offspring, and so reproductive age females experience more costs from rape, and so we anticipated more psychological pain associated with rape, and that's what we found. And also women who were in pair bond, well, marriage is all we had, marriage versus non-marriage, which is not perfect for what we were trying to test, but it was a level relevant to what we were trying to test. Basically, we're trying to test a female that's in a relationship with a male in which the male is investing. That's going to cause her more psychological pain following rape than in a female who's single. And we did find that for marriage compared to non-marriage. And then if a female shows signs of resistance, as documented by the health workers, looked at all these victims of sexual assault and recorded in detail the trauma to the body, other than the rape itself, that trauma, but bruises and cuts and so forth. They recorded all that in detail. So we had that information for each victim of sexual assault. And that showed that females who had evidence of resistance in the cuts and bruises and so forth had less psychological trauma and from following rape. So it's a presentation of resistance. It's not consensual sex, and so those were things that we looked at in that very interesting data set we're able to look at.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And does it occur that often, at least in humans, that men are victims of rape from other men or even women?
It occurs too frequently. I mean, boys being raped by men, by boys, again, I mean a pre-reproductive age male human, and men being raped by men, especially in the context of prisons and so forth. It's amazing that we tolerate all that male rape these days. It seems to be, it doesn't get very much attention, you've noticed, right? People just say, yeah, there's a lot of rape in prison, but there's nothing done about it. I think that's a tragedy, a moral tragedy in our society. But back to these two hypotheses, ultimate hypotheses for why men rape. So if men have rape adaptation in their heads, that does not mean that there will be no byproduct kinds of rape, because adaptations give rise to byproducts. So you can have men raping elderly women, post-reproductive age women, which can have no reproductive consequences for the male, or raping girls, pre-reproductive age females, or raping men. Those are byproducts of rape. If you take a well-studied system of rape, there's a seal, species of seal, in which the males rape females, and they mate with them consensually too, depending on the situation. So the females prefer dominant males in this seal, but subordinate males rape females, so the subordinate males, however, will focus their rape attempts on females in estrus, so females that are fertile in their cycle. Males can tell, and they'll focus their rape attempts there. However, these males are very, very ardent in their pursuit of sex by females, and will sometimes rape females outside of estrus. They'll rape female baby seals. They'll even rape corpses of seals. So those are all byproducts of basically an adaptation in the male seal's head for pursuing estrus females in the pursuit of rape. And so you get byproducts from rape adaptation. So that men rape men, that men rape boys, that men rape elderly women is not contrary to the hypothesis that men have rape adaptation, because you expect byproduct events occurring from any adaptation, not just sexual ones of men. But we emphasized how to test these hypotheses, and especially the rape adaptation hypothesis in some of our writing. And we could talk about that if you were interested.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sure. But before we get into that, could you just please explain why, and we already talked a lot here about the evolutionary explanations for rape, so it must be clear by now, but anyway, I would like to ask you the question. Why doesn't it really help to combat or to fight rape a theory like the one that is espoused by people from certain social sciences or even people from fields like women's studies, that rape is nothing but a social construct?
Well, it doesn't help in the in the alleviation of the social problem of rape. It doesn't help because it's wrong. So if you have a problem, it be a sexual problem or any problem, social problem or other kind of problem, you have to know the causes underlying the problem. So if you don't know the causes underlying the problem, you don't have any way to solve it. For example, you take tuberculosis, that disease. You're wasting your time if you have no idea that it's caused by a particular bacterium and so forth. If you know that, then you're in a position to do something about it. And we do a lot about tuberculosis because we do believe in the germ theory. We believe more specifically that a particular bacterium causes tuberculosis. We know which, because of scientific research, we know what antibiotics will knock that bacterium out and so forth. We got all that causal stuff. That gives us power in dealing with the problem. The same argument for any kind of problem. Take, I often use peptic ulcers, for example. It was thought for a long time by the medical establishment that ulcers are caused by stress in one's environment. Boy, they got that wrong. There's a Nobel Prize in medicine given for the discoverers of the actual causes of peptic ulcers caused by a bacterium. Helicobacter pylori causes ulcers, and now we give antibiotics. So that's obvious to anybody, it seems to me, that would give it any thought whatsoever. If you've got a problem, social or otherwise, then you've got to understand the causes of it, and then you're in a position, and only then are you in a position to do something about it. And of course, to understand causes of things, you require the scientific method. That's what the scientific method is for, identifying the causes of the things in the world in which we live. It is the only way to understand the causes of things in the world in which we live. And so these people who are against science, the science of rape, and that if you're against the evolutionary application to rape, you're anti-science. I mean, you're anti-enlightenment in general, basically. So those people are very naive about the fundamental fact that to understand the causes of a problem is the only way to solve it. Solutions to problems are suggested left and right, often by politicians. You hear them suggesting all these solutions. But solutions that are not based on understanding causation of the problem can solve nothing. And so that's it. You've got to understand the causes of rape, both ultimate and proximate. By that I mean ultimate, I mean evolutionary causes, the evolutionary background of men's sexual coercion. You've got to understand all that. And you've got to understand the proximate causes. By proximate, I mean those causes that act in now time, immediate time, within the lifetime of a man. So things like testosterone levels, things like social upbringing, those kinds of events that bring about rape too. So it's rape is a result of, like any other feature of any living organism, has ultimate and proximate causes. Mm-hmm. So the whole criticism, and there was a lot of it, of course, coming from social science types and so forth that were very naive about no training in evolutionary biology. Back to the fundamental flaw in Western education. They don't teach people that we're an evolved organism, which is where you got to start if you're going to be serious in discussion about anything in humans. It was terrible. Yeah, it was really a documentation of how fundamentally misinformed. So many people are, including in academics. I mean, a lot of the criticism was coming from various branches of so-called academy.
Mhm. Okay, and so as a follow-up, does an evolutionary approach to rape provide us with specific policies that we could put into practice through legal means to try to prevent rape? And if so, what are them?
Yeah, what we've suggested policies. We suggested a few things. By we, I mean my colleague who I've done most of this research with, Craig Palmer, who's a professor at the University of Missouri Anthropology Department, and we suggested some policy changes, some policy applications. And one was, and this one was very criticized as naive, but yeah, I think it's defensible without any problem. So you've got, you need to teach people about the evolution of human sexual differences. We know a tremendous amount about that, the evolution of sexual differences, men's sexuality, women's sexuality, and so forth. You've got to teach people that. And you can start that teaching in grammar school. Start that teaching in grammar school. So in an informed world, children would begin to understand evolutionary biology, the evolution of our species, how important it is for their understanding of themselves and other people, and for problems in general, to see humans as evolved organisms. This would start in grammar school. And then it would continue, and they would have to pass these courses and so forth to get through grammar school and high school and be part of the fundamental curriculum. And of course, that's not the world in which we live, because there's so much opposition to evolutionary thinking, not only from certain ideologies, certain religious ideologies, but conservatism in general is contrary to modern knowledge oftentimes. And then in academics, you get these people that are, basically maintaining the view that evolution doesn't matter and all that. So it would be very difficult to do that. But one more specific thing we suggested is you give, if you can't get the policy changed so that the kids in grammar school begin to learn evolutionary biology and the fact that we're an evolved animal, then at least have a course in the evolution of sexual differences and human sexuality that is required for people to get a driver's license. So everybody wants to drive. So you got an audience there. You got people. Everybody wants to drive, get a driver's license, and make them pass a real course in human biology before they get that license. That would be one way to do it. Another thing we've suggested is to try to make men do better with our raising of men. And by that I mean specifically, you want to create resourceful environments in which men are raised. So there's a lot of evidence that you can make slow track men that are not so aggressive and sexually aggressive, engaging in criminal activity, rape and otherwise, robbery, rape, all those risky activities, if you raise boys in a resourceful environment. And that would include environments in which there's fathers present. Okay, so father absence versus father presence predicts the kind of boy that is shaped, and hence the kind of man you get at the end when the boy becomes a man sexually. And there's a lot of evidence that father presence and other kinds of resourceful ecological situations in a boy's rearing reduces the likelihood that you get these fast-track guys. And these fast-track guys are one big source, not the only source, but one big source of sexual coercion. They have no empathy for how the female feels and so forth, and that, of course, is part of the rape problem. The male just doesn't understand, doesn't comprehend that what he's doing is hurting the female. He lacks empathy, and so that's one thing we pushed is a better resource ecology for more men, and that involves, that gets down to economics, the wealth disparity and so forth. Distribution of wealth in many places is terrible. The United States is about the same as Ivory Coast now, and just terrible wealth disparity. And so lots of that creates an environment for lots and lots of boys to be raised in a situation where they're going to rob, they're going to rape, and so forth when they go up. And the evolution of that contingency. So boys' development is condition dependent. So if you raise a boy with resources and social nourishment and so forth, all that stuff, then you get a boy who's more slow track. Okay, he delays gratification. He's willing to delay gratification, and sexually and otherwise. And if you raise a boy without those resources, then you get a boy who's very fast track, will not delay gratification, and so forth, and that includes in the sexual domain. So, all that's understood. That's coming out of fundamental evolutionary biology. That is the sub-theory of evolution involving life history evolution. And so fast track versus slow track, that applies to all organisms, not just humans. And so that's one thing. So you can do things like, we suggest, there was a policy, I don't know if it's still on the books in Australia, but it was a good one at the time, and we talked about it some as just a no-brainer kind of thing you could do if you wanted to help boys become more responsible, less coercive men. And it was to give grandparents a tax credit if they move to the environment where the same neighborhood, let's say, as their grandkids. And grandparents often do that kind of thing. They move to be closer to the grandkids and so forth. Give them a tax credit for it. And hence you increase grandparents are often very good investors in their grandkids. And hence you get the benefit of parental investment in the kids and more resources for the kids. So give tax credit. You can also give tax credits to men who consistently invest in their kids too. That would be another way to do it. So things like that are things we discussed that seem to us to be obvious and additions that come out of just fundamental evolutionary biology that could be useful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so these are very complicated and controversial topics, but I would also like to ask you, how would you reply to people, in this case particularly perhaps third wave feminists, who, when people say that they should use this knowledge to give advice to particularly young women about how to avoid situations and behaviors that would put them more at risk of being victims of rape, and then they say that doing this is victim blaming and is a sexist attitude? What would you reply to that?
My reply is that scientific analysis of a problem, and here that's what we're talking about, scientific analysis of the problem of rape, is not the same as blaming. Blaming is a judgment call on what the person is doing, and it has nothing to do with scientific analysis. They're totally independent. So the scientific analysis is interested in understanding causation. That's what science is for, understand the causes of things. And then others can apply that causal knowledge to solve problems. But scientific analysis and blame are different. There's no blame stated, no blame implied, in anything I'm saying. So, I mean, to say that, you would not have any rape, of course, in humans if there were not female adaptation for mate choice. That's just a statement of fact. And that doesn't blame females. It's just reality. So we've often emphasized you just need to get real. If you got a problem, get real. And that means focusing on the science. So that's the realism out there, scientific knowledge of our world. So that's my response to. You sometimes get that. Oh, you guys are saying females are to blame, that kind of thing, and there's just no blame in scientific analysis at all. It's different. It's trying to understand causes, not blaming anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is precisely why I wanted to ask you that. And so perhaps just a final question, that is, could we also apply this knowledge in a clinical psychology environment, that is, to try to better help women who are victims of rape and even perhaps their partners and their family?
I would hope so. And that would of course take clinical psychologists who are trained in the things we're talking about, evolutionary biology and so forth. They're trained. That's not the typical training of clinical psychologists, but that would be one way to improve things too. Have clinical psychologists who could do therapy with women, and women's partners, women's families, and so forth, to allow them to understand what's going on and why they feel the way they do about things. And knowledge is power, as anyone who's ever thought about it has stated, that the more you know about the situation, the better position you're in to deal with your problems. And so I would hope so. But I know of no therapy groups that have incorporated that kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dr. Thornhill, just before we finish this conversation, would you like to share with people where they can follow your work on the internet? And I don't know if you would also like to share perhaps some interesting piece of work you're doing at the moment.
Yes, I mean, if you Google my name, Randy Thornhill, then that will take you to various publications of mine. I have 4 books that I've published. You've mentioned one, The Natural History of Rape, but I've published in other books as well. And all that stuff is on accessible on the internet. Published lots and lots of scientific papers. I've been publishing scientific papers for almost 50 years now. And so that stuff is accessible too. Much of that is accessible on the internet by going to Google Scholar. Many of my papers are there. And so that's a way to learn more about it. So what was the other one? You said one.
If you're doing some interesting piece of work at the moment that you would like to tell us about.
I hope so. I hope it's interesting. My main research over the last 12 years has involved the causes of people's core values. And I noticed in your program that you interviewed my colleague Mark Schaller some time ago, and I've worked with Mark on some of this. That you talked to him about the behavioral immune system and so forth. That's very, very much a part of my interest now, looking at why people have the values they do. So why people are conservative, why others are real conservative, why some people are liberal, why some people are very liberal, and so forth. That's what I'm doing now. I've retired a little bit. I'm just teaching one semester a year now. I'm teaching evolution of human sexuality to undergraduates at the University of New Mexico. And been doing that, teaching that course, The Evolution of Human Sexuality, for about 28 years now. A big part of that is the discussion of sexual coercion. And the students really come out of that with a full understanding of sexual coercion and at least appreciation of how the scientific knowledge, including the evolutionary knowledge of rape, could lead to a safer world for females.
Mhm. Okay, so Dr. Thornhill, it was really a lovely conversation I think that we had here today. I really love your work, not just about rape, but also about disgust and other things as you just talked about. So thank you a lot for taking the time.
Sure, thank you very much. Nice talking with you.
Hi everybody, thank you for watching this interview until the end. I would also like to ask you to please pay a visit to my Patreon page and consider making a pledge if you like the work that I've been doing. And I would also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons, Karen Litzke, Anne Blanchett, Per Elga Larsen, Lau Guerrero and Chantel Gelinas. Thank you for all.